Okay, I'd like to explain a little bit more about this question that you've been working on because you're going to evaluate your own response from it. We're looking at a comparative analysis question. So, it sounds from talking to a few of you that perhaps it wasn't entirely clear what you thought you should do. I'd like to remind you that we did exactly this last year when we presented on our PowerPoints and we compared two different styles of music. So I'll remind you what some of those things are, and I'll just talk you through the question. So first idea is we need to compare two themes. We're going to compare the river, and I've told you where you can find it in the score, and I'm sure you found this, and where you can find it on the YouTube. We're going to compare the river to the forest hunt, which are two different themes within the Moldau. And the Moldau is one section of the larger work, Ma Vlast, my fatherland, the fatherland. So you're going to compare these two. And remember, comparing means it involves comparing and contrasting. So you're going to look at things that are similar and different. The word compare means both of those things. And the crux of the question is, after you compare them, you need to evaluate which section more successfully depicts the chosen scene. So which one of them sounds more like its title? Does the river really sound like a river? Does the forest hunt really sound like a forest hunt? Of course they both do, but which one does this more successfully? You're going to do this by analyzing the composer's manipulation of the musical elements and compositional techniques. So you're going to look at, tear apart, analyze means to break down, to break into component parts, what the composer has done in order to create a feeling of a river, a feeling of a forest hunt. How have they manipulated the elements of pitch, which is melody, harmony, tonality, duration, so on and so forth. And furthermore, you're going to justify your response. So this should be assumed, but I wrote it out for you. Justify your response from evidence from the score, and that would be beaten bar numbers, specific ones, or the audio recording. And the audio recording, you can go for minutes and seconds. So I've given you a little bit of an example of where the themes start, so you know which bars you're going to be looking at. But that's justifying the score. So let's just for a moment just remind ourselves what comparative analysis means. To compare means both similarities and differences. And that's the reason, that says differences, and that's the reason why I have given you this pro forma at the end. So here's word, blah, blah, blah. That's why I've given you this, because your comparison will be about each of these elements for the river and for the forest hunt. You need to talk about both of them. You need to write down this evidence and look at it from the point of view of each of the elements. When you sit down to do the exam, you will have a pro forma like this, and it will not have any of this. Sorry. You're going to just need to organize that yourselves. I'm giving you this as a stepping stone toward comparative analysis, but you're just going to need to know that the elements are pitch, duration, expressive devices, texture, timbre, compositional devices can have their own space, and any other point of interest that you find. So, and within those are pitch has the three different areas, melody, harmony, tonality. Duration has probably more than this, and this is all, if I quickly flick to your web page. Oh, yep. I'll go back to the top. This is all here on your web page. Eventually, here we go. Have a good time. This is all on your web page under the Elements and Features page. So if you ever forget anything about the elements or the compositional devices, I made you a page. You got a page. There's a whole page there called Elements and Features. And when the computer feels like playing fair, it'll go to that page and it'll show you all this stuff. So that's what the pro forma is for. It's to get you to organize your ideas so that you can answer the question. So the question again is compare. And the thing about comparing is that you need to compare within the same paragraph. So if I start talking about something, if I start my paragraph about, I'm going to talk about pitch. For this paragraph, for this whole paragraph, I'm going to focus on one idea, but I'm going to discuss both pieces. I'm going to discuss within the paragraph both the river and the forest hunt. either a way that they're similar or a way that they are different, but I'm going to discuss it together. Having a little trouble here with the old panorama. See, this is a drawing my son did. That's a lot of fun. Now if we can, here we go, give me a chance to draw. Nothing. So the big point I was making previous was that we are going to compare within each paragraph. Okay, compare both pieces, both themes in this case, within the same paragraph. So looking at the question again, compare the river and evaluate which is more successful. So I've given you the two themes here. Again, this is not, you're not going to get this on the exam. Don't depend on having the theme there in front of you. You'll have the score or the audio. And you'll be able to see the minutes and seconds from that, and you're going to have to use that. So how do you construct this so that you get an A paper? Well, I've got a few rules that will probably help, and I've given you a checklist that will lead you in that direction. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is structure your response. And this is not a surprise, we have done this before. We want to have, for starters, an introduction. And in the introduction, we want to probably answer the question, or at least tell our audience what the question is, and ask them some more questions that are going to lead them to think in the direction that we're going, such as which one would be better, the river or the forest hunt? At describing its title, this is what I will endeavor to answer, and then you will answer the question in the conclusion. There's either way you can go about it. The introduction should have also the three elements that you plan to talk about, and you'll talk about them in that order. Okay, and then when we get into the actual paragraphs, the body is, you want to talk about element 1, and then element 2, and so on and so forth. And you want to talk about that for both the river, and you want to compare that to the forest hunt. Don't just talk about one of them, because after all, this is, once again, a comparison. So you're looking to compare these two, and if you just talk about one, you haven't compared them, even though you are sure that the river or the forest hunt is better. And by the way, there isn't a right answer for this. It's using the evidence that's there for you to construct a right answer. Either of these can be the right answer. And I'd like to throw in the word link here. And I'm going to throw in the word link with each of these because perhaps for element 1, maybe I mentioned that it was pitch, for example. Then I am going to say something in this link about pitch at the end of my introduction. I might say that I will discuss the three elements, pitch and something, and I will begin with how Smetana has employed pitch to create blah, 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 whatever your first point is. Then you start your paragraph about pitch. When you're done talking about that, at the end of your paragraph about pitch, where you have discussed both the river and the forest hunt, you'll have a linking sentence that leads you towards element 2, and perhaps that will be, I'm just guessing, I'm making this up from the top of my head, that'll be about duration and time signatures and timing. And then you'll have another linking sentence that leads you, and don't just leap into element 3. I'm so glad I'm speaking this because that's illegible. And let's say element 3 is timbre, which is probably not a bad idea. And so you're actually going to link these together so that you finish talking about duration, you send us a link to let us know that you're going to talk about timbre. You might not say it directly. You might say something like it's the timbre of the brass instruments combined with whatever you said about the duration, which makes the piece so effective. Link to next paragraph. And then finally, you structure your piece with a conclusion. And what happens in the conclusion, you must definitely are going to restate and answer the question at this point. So which one is more successful? And you are going to address those three elements with the best examples. The best examples, that says examples, that's amazing, from your 3 paragraphs. So if you had several things to say about pitch, then you want to choose the one that really nailed it for whichever one of these 2 you thought was better. The same with duration, the same with timbre. Could be could be a point of interest as well. It could be a point of interest as long as it's something you've said before. Here's a general rule. I'm going to put a star on it. There should be nothing that you haven't talked about before. Nothing new in your conclusion. Don't throw in an extra fact here unless it has appeared previously. So your conclusion should be a summary of, once again, answering the question, talking about the three elements you were going to talk about, and in addition to that, give some examples of why they were true. Yeah, I'm going to talk about pitch, duration, and timbre, but now I'm going to talk about this example about the pitch, about the linear melody. I'm going to talk about the 6/8 timing, and I'm going to talk about the timbre of either the strings or the brasses, whichever you thought was better, and why they answered the question of which one of these more successfully depicts the chosen scene. Okay, so an A response is well structured. An A response does something really important. It draws valid conclusions. So a valid conclusion is more than just the key signature. So an example might be that there is linear contour. There's a linear contour, especially for the river. That's great. But that in and of itself is not a conclusion, that's just a fact. So the fact that it has linear contour leads us to the conclusion, which is the effect that it has, which gives, this is one way of saying it, the feeling of a flowing river. So that's why it's effective, not because it's linear, but because that suits a river. So you have drawn a conclusion, gives the feeling of, gives the impression of, helps the listener to feel. Just telling me, for example, that it's in the key of E minor, that's not a conclusion, that's a fact. Drawing a valid conclusion, stating why it's in E minor, even if it's just an opinion. You know, the key of E minor is dark. The key of E minor is serious. It's something that makes sense within the context of what you're talking about, but it fits in with everything else you're talking about. I mean, the linear contour gives a feeling of a flowing river. You can't really prove that. You are drawing a conclusion from what's there and from what you know about rivers and what you know about. You'll tie this in with the timbre of the instrument as well. It all needs to fit together, but you've got to gives the feeling of, you've got to say why the composer has used that. And the last most important thing, the really good papers have evidence from the source. So if you're talking about a linear contour, give me an example of where does this happen. So this is perhaps from the score in terms of bar and beat number. So it could be bar 41, but it happens in beat 3. And it should be really specific. So, e.g., this could be happening in the violin part, or this could be happening in the violin and viola parts. And that's why the beat is so important in there. It starts on such and such a beat. The evidence from the score is going to support your valid conclusions. It has linear contour. You don't have to say that it's throughout the entire piece, but you can say it has linear contour, and an example of that is in the score or in the audio source. So either one is a valid source. So that would be the YouTube, and that would be likely minutes and seconds. And again, specify. You can say that it's the violin, you can say that it's a certain part, you can say that it's a certain section, but don't just say, at such and such a time this happens. You'll say, at such and such a time, in the violin section, there is linear melodic contour, which gives the feeling of a flowing river. This is providing evidence that supports your conclusions, which support the answer to the question. Okay? And I have tried to make this easy for you by creating these peer evaluation sheets. And the peer evaluation sheet, oh, it finally went to the Elements of Music. There they are, on the Elements of Music page. And now I'm back to where I was before. The peer evaluation sheet you will find on the exam prep that I put down here on the right side of your Sacred to Secular page. There it is, Musicology Exam Practice. When you get down to that, you'll see that there are both peer and self-assessments. So actually, I'm saying peer assessment, it's actually self-assessment that you're going to start with. So in here, once again, this is where you were before. I just slightly moved it. You will find that all of these documents appear in here. I'll show you in a minute. But you're going to start with self-evaluation, and you're going to go through and tick these boxes. There aren't really right or wrong answers. This is made to make you think about what you're saying. So I used the performer to plan my response before I started writing. That's an important thing to recognize. Did you actually go through and write out details about each piece? I used it when I got stuck. I thought about the elements before I got started, and you can copy this little tick mark into as many boxes as apply. And if you tick the last one, I just started writing and hope for the best, woohoo, that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do. I would rather that you are doing this. You actually planned out your response first, and I think you will find that it will make your time more useful. You spend 10 minutes doing that and the rest of your time writing, as opposed to you just start writing and think, I'll make it up as I go along. It's probably not going to be as successful, but it's important for you to recognize what you did when you started working on that. There are some questions here in the same vein about how did you structure your response. There are some suggestions of ways that it would work. Any one of these can work, but I definitely suggest that you think about the question reappearing, making your judgment clear, mentioning those 3 elements that you plan to assess. And if you're not making a judgment, if you're not answering the question for a start, then ask questions that you plan to answer later to get the audience interested. So I'm sure you can read through the rest of this yourself. Just some ways to help you to look at your own work. And when you've done that, at the bottom of the sheet, you can then hand your paper over to somebody that you know is going to, which could be anybody in our class, but somebody that you choose will look at it with objective eyes and will really give you honest feedback, not somebody that's going to hand it back and say, yeah, it was great, because as nice as that sounds, it's not really useful. So I've created a peer evaluation form. It's linked here and it's linked here, and you can use that to have somebody else cast their eyes over what you're doing. Okay, and that form eventually is going to show up here. It's all here in one place for exam practice. So that is the gist of the deal. We are going to make sure that when we're comparing both similarities and differences. So things that are the same and things that are not so the same. Okay, both. And we are going to do them within each paragraph for both themes. That's what comparison is. That's what you did last year in the dim dark past, if you can remember that. And structuring response is going to be just the same. An introduction, linking to the first element you've talked about in your introduction, linking to the second element that you've talked about in your introduction, linking to the third, then finally concluding, making sure that you've answered that question and restated those elements. Okie dokie. And that's how it goes. Thank you very much.